I found that I was avoiding hard conversations because I was afraid this person may quit. And I didn't want to hold them accountable. But what I feared would happen if they quit was actually happening while they were staying.
Beth Cannon is a leadership strategist, a TEDx speaker, and also author of the upcoming book, Transform Your Team. Something I really love that you do is you really teach not just from theory, but from your real world experience. And your upcoming book, I think, is a really good example of that in teaching leaders about how to manage teams and building company cultures in a post-pandemic world. So, Transform Your Team, can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the book?
I've been actually working on the book for over a year, but it was kind of born out of just journal entries of my own through just the really hard season over the last few years. You know, if you're leading people right now, you know, people are not okay and things are different. And even though all signs point to a full recovery on the outside, I think for people who are leading teams now, we realize like we're very different. There are pre-pandemic work people and there are post-pandemic work people, and we are not the same. And so the book, it really came out of just my own struggles in leading a team through that season, and just realizing that it wasn't just my team, that a lot of it was my own ways that I led, the ways that I avoided holding my team accountable, the ways that I realized I led out of fear when we were leading out of the crisis, not just in it, but leading out of it. And just a lot of those really big challenges that led to the content of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think something about the book as well is that it's, although it pulls from your own experience, it's something that's so relatable to so many leaders out there. And I think it's something that even aspiring leaders can learn from and see a roadmap for how they want to build their own teams in the future. So, was there a moment you realized that this book wasn't maybe just a leadership book, but it truly was a personal one for you?
Absolutely. I find it really hard to get advice from people who are not leading in the trenches right now. Like, this is not some theory like this time I worked with a guy named Steve and here's how I helped him fix his culture. It's born out of the experience, and the broken record conversations that I have with a lot of leaders is where did my team go? What's happened? I was simultaneously leading my own team through these really hard challenges while coaching and training other business leaders as well who are experiencing some of the same things.
Yeah, absolutely. Were there any moments along the way where you kind of thought, should I write this or should I put this moment in the book? Anything that kind of stopped you from creating the book the way that it's been written?
You know, that's an interesting question. And yes, I wrote some of the really hard parts. And once I wrote it, I realized I wasn't writing from a healed place. I was still writing from some wounds. You know, 2023, 2024, every time that I would go speak, I wasn't speaking from healed. I was speaking from gaping open wounds. And sometimes I can speak from scars all day long, sometimes even scabs. But those seasons were wounds that were really challenging to be able to walk through. So I would write it and I would go, gosh, I really need to do some own work in my heart about that and realize what was my role in what I allowed to happen. And so there was a lot of revelation along the way.
Yeah. Wow. So a little bit part therapy, it sounds like, writing this
Therapy,
book.
theology, all the things.
Well, there's a quote that stands out to me, and this kind of speaks, I think, to what you mentioned about looking internally and identifying where maybe leaders' own gaps are before they necessarily look at their teams. The quote is, "Most leaders spend their time managing symptoms instead of diagnosing root causes." What do you think that kind of looks like in real life when you're working with leaders? You know, they're managing these symptoms.
I would say check yourself before you wreck yourself. Because a lot of the times it's either the people or it's the processes, right? And so when we're trying to figure out what is happening, it's not just the symptom. It's not just what we see on the surface. A lot of times there's a deeper root cause. For example, delegation. You would tell someone to do something. This is what I need you to do. This is when it's due. Here's how to do it. Great. And then I don't have to think about it anymore. And it seems like in the last few years, we had a harder time grasping how to truly delegate. So I go back to say, what was the barrier to that getting done? And oftentimes it was, I wasn't super clear on who is doing what, by when, and then following up along the way and having those systems in place to make sure that when things get wonky at work, my team still understands what the priorities are. And I think as a visionary, I have a billion ideas before breakfast. And so I would find a lot of times we would sit down in our strategic planning meetings and I would say, hey guys, I've got some really great initiatives. And my team is like, what about the ones we talked about in last month's meeting? And so, a lot of those challenges pointed back to me.
Kind of ensuring that you're driving that clarity with the team and they know what priorities they should be focusing on. Why do you think we're so quick to fix symptoms instead of slowing down to diagnose those root problems?
Because we want to move and we want to move fast. And I'm a fixer, right? And so I over fixating on sometimes on the things that I cannot fix. What we do though as leaders is we often rob our team from the opportunity to learn or the opportunity to move through those things. And so sometimes it's easy just to fix things. And it's interesting, as a Gen X mom, we take a look at our Gen Z team. My friend Kathy calls Gen Z the Zoomers. And, as a Zoomer, I'm their mom. Yep. And I look at the parenting styles of how Gen Z was raised, and a lot of times it goes back to their parents who maybe didn't have it as easy growing up, or maybe felt like, hey, we would have been successful if we had more resources or more guidance. So what did the parents do? Provide everything. Provide a map, provide a mirror, provide the magnifying glass, and really pave the way for these kids. And so I find that sometimes my leadership style maybe goes back to my parenting style. We want our team to love their job. We want things to be easy for them and fun for them. And so then we fix things along the way and sometimes rob them of opportunities to step into what they need to learn.
I think that's a great kind of metaphor, bringing in how you parent to how you lead a team. Would you say that that's kind of how it showed up mostly in your team? You were providing them with maybe too much of a roadmap?
Yes, and the reason that we as leaders provide too much of a roadmap, it's the root of that is really control. Because we're afraid that if we trust the results to someone else, what if they don't get it done? What if a good result doesn't come out of it? So then we think if we can predict it, we can prepare for it. And so what that does is we rob our teams of an opportunity to learn and grow. So I definitely do find that. And you have to trust your team. And part of Transform Your Team, and you'll read about this in the book, is just some real challenges that I had with a few particular leaders in my company. One who would just absolutely not take instruction, not take direction, not take coaching. And one of the things that I know to be true, you can't coach attitude. So when there's a job to get done, as a fixer who would fixate on the fixing, I would say, I don't have the energy or the estrogen or whatever it is that I need to do this, so I'm going to go ahead, pave the path, make it easier, believing it would cause me less trouble going forward. And that wasn't always the right thing to do. But I see more often than not strong leaders doing that because they just want to move on to the next thing. And they know that slowing down and being clear slows the momentum. And sometimes we don't like to slow down.
Yeah. Yes, I think a lot of leaders are kind of movers and shakers, so it can be hard to really kind of slow down and reevaluate what's going on around you. In the book, you mentioned fear and trust, and those are kind of big themes in Transform Your Team. There's another quote from the book that I really like. It says, "The way you respond or react, speak or retreat, implode or explode isn't random. It's shaped by your story and formed by the experiences that drive, derail, or demotivate you." How does fear kind of show up in yourself and others that you've worked with? How does fear show up in leadership without people maybe realizing it?
Well, Harvard Business Review says that 1 in 3 leaders lead more out of fear than out of strategy. And I found that to be interesting. And you mentioned the TED Talk, and part of my TED Talk was around that we all have a story that scares us. And the story that scares us oftentimes is the motivator for why we do things. And so, take just when do we speak and when do we retreat? Sometimes I found that I was avoiding hard conversations because I was afraid this person may quit. And I didn't want to hold them accountable because I didn't want them to quit and I could manage around their weaknesses. But the hard part is what I feared would happen if they quit was actually happening while they were staying. And so I chose often to retreat and not speak when fear of what could happen if I started that conversation would just come up. And so I would go into the amygdala hijack, right? That fight, flight, freeze, or freak out. And, our bodies don't know the difference in, hey, I need to have a conversation with you, as to, hey, there's a rattlesnake on the trail about to attack you. We go into that cortisol chemical rush that goes through our bodies. And so we just sometimes fear, what's going to happen if we initiate this mess of our own making. And so I think a lot of people avoid for that reason.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that that's a really common concern, especially for people who feel like, they've had a team member who's been with them 2, 3, 5, sometimes even 10 years. They're so worried that that person's going to leave because they think, oh, I don't have the time to retrain someone, I don't have the time to onboard someone new, but they're willing to accept all the different kind of things going on with that existing teammate, all the ways that they're sacrificing because they're tolerating a certain type of behavior or attitude. And so I love that you called that out, because I think if more people took a step back, you'd realize the grass really can be greener if you do the hard work of training and onboarding a new person.
Yeah, and even in the research for the book, I found 7 different studies said that usually the outcome isn't as bad as we think it's going to be. We tell ourselves these stories of how horrible it's going to be, and I tend to over-catastrophize sometimes things too in my head. 7 studies said that it's usually not as bad as we think it's going to be. And also, too, it's not just that they're going to quit, but we don't want to hurt people's feelings. Right. And that's another thing, because you care about your people, and they're putting in effort. They just need some feedback tweaks. So a lot of it is, I know that leaders need the courage to have these feedback conversations, and they just don't know how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, what are some signs that a leader might be reacting from past experiences instead of their present reality?
Yeah, I think we have to know what our triggers are. We like, for example, I have a great new leader now, and she stepped into these shoes a little over a year ago after just some really hard challenges. And sometimes she's on a learning curve, right? And so sometimes I'll go back to, if she's, made a mistake, or there was a disconnect, or there was a gap, rather than going back to her and saying, hey, I want to make sure that I was clear when I gave you this assignment. What was your understanding of what results you were responsible for? And then when I hear her repeat, oh, okay, so then there was just a step here along the way that we messed up. And I've learned to ask better questions like, what results are you responsible for? What was your understanding of the assignment, rather than assuming that I gave the correct instructions. Surely she understood it, and surely this should be the result. It's just asking those deeper questions that oftentimes we miss.
Yeah. Kind of opening up a dialogue, and then, kind of seeing what deeper things may be going on.
Right. But it does take time also. Yeah. It takes the time to sit, it takes the time to listen, and it takes the time to hear. And I've just learned, before I point the finger at someone else, I need to check my own pulse.
Yeah.
And see, was it me? Was it the instruction? Was it the person, or was it the process? And so often we jump to, well, these have always been the processes. Why aren't the processes working? And more often than not, leaders are really missing the boat because their expectations are in their head and they never truly communicated them.
You mentioned identifying your triggers. What's the early work to start moving away from the way you've been leading into a better way of leading your team?
Yeah, well, let's check your own pulse.
Yeah.
In chapter 1, there's a framework around pulse, and pulse is an acronym for just an exercise to stop and pause and ground yourself and pay attention to the tension of what's happening on your team.
Yeah. I love that. And the book is packed with a lot of different, kind of guides and different frameworks and things that people can kind of use and rely on.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's part story, it's part strategy, but there are definitely some frameworks and playbooks inside the book that I really want you to leave. I don't want you to just listen for inspiration or information. Like, I want it to be application and implementation so that you can read it. And there's, in the book, there's a QR code to scan where you can go and download a guidebook. There's a workbook for the entire book. There's lots of templates. I'm a massive fan of time hacks. And so if I can save you some time and give you some frameworks to help you in your leadership journey, it's packed with things like that.
Amazing. And this next quote, we talked about clarity a little bit earlier, but I'd love to kind of dig in a little bit more because I do think that that's a big component of leadership that a lot of people miss. So quote is, culture doesn't heal without clarity. So why do you feel like clarity is such a missing piece in so many different teams?
Well, if you confuse, you lose. And, the first time I really dove into the word clarity was several years ago. We were rebranding Stretch and Grow, and, the company had been around nearly 3 decades, and it just felt kind of messy. And so I heard a brand strategist, her name's Hillary Hartling, and she's done both of our brands. And I heard her on a podcast, and she said, if your brand doesn't have clarity, your customers don't know how you can help them. Yeah. And I thought about that from a customer-facing, standpoint. Yeah. But then as I began to go through that rebrand process, I realized there were so many things on the back end of our business that didn't have clarity. Yeah. So we began to redo all of our systems and just being clear, like I said, simple questions like who's doing what by when? What results are you responsible for? Those things really just lit me up and helped me to realize it's not just training people on what to do and making sure they get it done. It's helping them understand how their role helps with the success and the company and moving the needle forward with the business. What side effects, when you see a business that doesn't have a lot of clarity in the culture, what side effects are you seeing usually? A lot of confusion. And it's hard, and we've scaled multiple times. COVID completely shut our business down. So it was a total rebuild. After 25 years, it was a complete rebuild. And I realized the systems that we had in place were not going to work now. And so, we had to rebuild in 5 years what took us 25 years to build. And so anytime you scale, you break every system that you have. And I think a lot of leaders don't realize that. They think, what's worked before is going to continue to work. And it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. When you realize, well, that's not working anymore, and that's not working anymore. And then the leader's frustrated when their team's not executing, but how the work is getting done wasn't really clear. It was just all who's responsible for what, and especially in my work that I do with small businesses. If somebody doesn't own it, nobody owns it. Yeah. Would you say that that's kind of the first step in creating clarity for people who are looking to get started with that, is just kind of identifying ownership within the business? Yes, and in the part 2 of the book, it talks about designing the direction, and there's a section on building, like what are we building? And it's building those systems and making sure every single position understands what results are responsible for, what are their projects, what are their routines, and what does the scope of their work look like. Yeah, love that. And it just goes back to how practical the book is, kind of applying to everyday use, because you really have structured it like a framework. So I love that. In terms of who kind of carries the culture, typically that falls on the leaders, or really should. I've seen people try to pass it off to others on their team because they feel like maybe that's not necessarily their thing. But you have a quote in the book that talks about this, and you say, as the leader, you're the carrier of the culture. If you're unclear, your team will stay confused. And that's a big responsibility, and especially for some people who do try to pass the buck on that. How can leaders carry that responsibility without burning out? Well, the key to avoiding burnout is making sure that you take care of yourself before you get to work. Because the burnout oftentimes is not just what's happening at work. Like there's an underlying reason to the burnout, and typically it's not just work. It's a multitude of things that are happening in life. But, when you look at your org chart of your organization and you look to see who are your direct reports, you're responsible for creating the culture among those direct reports. And I don't say that to make people feel overwhelmed or to make people feel stressed. You've got to pay attention to the tension on your team, and you've got to start in creating those connections and in creating those relationships, because I do believe that whoever is directly reporting to you, you're responsible for creating that culture and what matters to you. Also in that design your direction, there's one that's called believe. What do we believe? It goes back to your, not just your mission, but your vision and your values, and how does your team behave? And there's so much now that we have to be mindful of that we weren't really mindful of that 5 years ago. So, in a big part of that, I think the book talks about is consistency. Yes.
Consistency is key in, driving that culture and making people feel valued and heard. So what kind of consistency actually builds trust?
That's a great question. I think it's showing up and being there for your team. Because, I have two businesses. We have Stretch and Grow, which is where I have a leadership team. I've got 4 people who report directly to me. We've got another layer of kind of coordinator management. And then we've got our team of instructors. And then I do the speaking, and I travel a lot, and I'm gone. And so I struggle with sometimes feeling like I'm not enough. Like I can't be enough to do this part, and I can't be enough to do that part. And so because my schedule is so varied, I find it really challenging. And, there's this whole teaching on, you've got to get the rhythm, you got to get the rhythm. Well, what if you're in a business that doesn't really have a rhythm? How do you stay connected? And so I think it's just the intentionality of finding those points. Now, I am very blessed. I have a director of operations she's got a processor personality. She looks at the details. I'm the big picture person, and she is the detail person. So she can kind of tell from a systems perspective, like, where are we seeing gaps? Yeah. But for me, as the leader of my leadership team, I've got to make sure that I'm connecting with them, that they feel seen, that they feel heard, that they feel valued, and that they know that even though I may not be physically present because I'm on the road, I'm always here for them, and I care what happens to them. And when they have something that they need to work through, it's not just, figure it out on your own. Now, I will have to say, when they do come to me and they've got issues, I'm always going to ask them to bring a few solutions. And it's kind of a little philosophy that I have: no bitching without pitching. Like, don't come complaining, because we have to have a solution, right? Everything is figure outable. And so if we've got an issue, how can we solve it? What's working, what's not working, and what needs to change? Because I really want them to think for themselves. I want to be unnecessary for them, but the truth is, especially with my younger leaders who haven't done this for a long time, I've got all this wisdom, I guess, or experience from doing things all these years, but I can't tell you, Sierra, how many times in the last few years I've had those, I didn't see that coming moment, and we're learning. So for the leader that thinks, I've done this for a long time, I know what I'm doing, the pandemic, if nothing else, made me realize I know nothing about human behavior, nothing about public health, because things just changed. In a different world, we have to figure out, how do we connect with people where they are?
Yeah. Well, I think being solution-oriented, as you mentioned, is kind of an undervalued, but also I think maybe something that not enough people necessarily work on improving in themselves. And so I think it's great that you're kind of instilling that trait in your team. Yeah.
Well, I always want the people on my team to know that they were well loved. And yes, I will say the L word. I think that leaders deserve a team that loves them, that genuinely cares about them. And I want a team that I genuinely love and care about. Doesn't mean you've got to do life together, but to truly and genuinely care about the people on your team, I think that matters a lot.
Another quote in the book, which I think is going to resonate with a lot of people, and maybe be kind of one of those aha moments ultimately, is the quote, "Your culture is a combination of what you create, tolerate, or celebrate." Can we kind of unpack that, and what were you thinking when you wrote it?
I was thinking about all the things that I tolerated. And the initial time I heard that concept was from one of my favorite leadership speakers, Craig Groeschel. He said, your culture is a combination of what you create or what you allow. And that really tucked into my soul, because I realized in a certain season what I was allowing was toxicity on my team. And I allowed an unhinged leader to capitalize on the team culture. She was going through a lot of personal problems, which prevented her from keeping her joy in life, much less work. And so because I knew she was navigating a lot of challenges, I was trying to be nice and not necessarily kind. And I think that, unkind is unclear and kind is clear. And so I tolerated a lot of things in the name of keeping the peace, probably some fear underneath that. And as a result, because I let a lot of those things slip, I saw our turnover begin to hijack. I saw our customers begin to become a little bit disconnected. I felt like I was disconnected from the team. And when I began to really pull back the screen and look what was going on, a lot of our systems weren't being followed. A lot of our values weren't being followed. Hiring, for example, in that post-pandemic era, where it was the era of quiet quitting, no motivation Monday, there were so many things that were happening and they were happening on my team in real time. And you don't realize the damage until you look back over your shoulder. I tolerated a lot. I tolerated toxicity. I tolerated disrespect. And, I just believe there's a line in life and work that once we cross it, we can't come back from it. And I see this with leaders a lot. I mean, there is a broken record of conversations that I hear on repeat. People don't want to work anymore. I can't get them to execute. Right. And, you hear those kinds of things, but why? What is it that's happening? And really figure out. And it's having those conversations. And had I just had the courage to confront some of the things that had happened, I don't think it would have gotten out of hand as much as it did. So again, I go back to the vulnerability. I mean, there's some very vulnerable moments in there that I'm not proud of, but if someone else can learn from my mistakes and what I tolerate, hopefully it'll keep you from walking down that same path. But it's what you tolerate, but it's also what you create. And when you realize, when you know what you believe and you know what you want to build and you know how your team needs to behave to get everyone aligned and moving in the right direction, there's such freedom. But most leaders I talk to have no idea what they want to create. Some of them are like, I want to create a space where people don't give me any problems, where I'm making all the money and I have no issues. Well, if you come looking for a friction-free fantasy, you're going to be sorely disappointed because people are messy. You're messy, I'm messy, all the people are messy, right? Yeah. And just figuring out what you want to create, but also what you celebrate. Yeah. And do you really acknowledge when great things happen on your team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a big one too. I think that, you mentioned Gen Z and how so much of the workforce is made up from that generation. And, being Gen Z myself, I can kind of speak to that there is definitely kind of a culture of participation awards or whatever you want to call it, where people really are used to being acknowledged for the small wins, and they're looking for that kind of celebration, those different moments to be acknowledged. I think in previous generations, a paycheck was all the things that people really needed, and that's really started to change. So, how do you encourage leaders to kind of celebrate moments with their team?
I think they've got to pay attention to what's happening. And I am of the generation to where, your feelings at work didn't matter. There's a chapter in the book called The Proper Use of the F Word. And it's not the F word that you're thinking, so you'll have to get the book to know what the real F word is. But there are so many things that are associated with how do you turn their potential into performance. Yep. And I would laugh and say, no cap, I'm their mom, right? Because, I understand what it is that they need, but sometimes I don't understand why they need it. Well, you got a raise or you got a bonus, and sometimes it is, just the wanting to celebrate. And so because I have some Gen Z leaders, and my daughter's one of them, right? Mm-hmm. I give them an opportunity, like, how do you want to celebrate? What feels good for you? And, we just had our company party, and I would have done a great restaurant and called it a day. And she's like, no, let's all have them over to our house and let's do a project and, let's do connection and all of these great ideas that she had. I would have been like, do people really want to do that? And they all showed up and they're like, we love this, and it was great. But it was a point of connection that she knew our team needed, that had I not listened, I would have missed the boat on that.
Gathering that feedback, I think, from especially the kind of leaders who are boots on the ground in the business is something that is really invaluable for leaders.
And I went for so long not really having a leadership team that was creative and wanted to take charge. They were very much, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Yeah. And I'm at the stage to where I need other people's ideas. Like, I need some other visionaries along the way to inspire ideas, because some people are just, and they'll do anything you tell them to do. But you just have to understand that going in, what that is. I love when they have great ideas and they come to me. Now, we can't always do all the ideas, right? But I think that it's important to give people a platform to talk about their ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Well, how do you kind of identify those, maybe rising stars in an organization, who you want to listen to, who you want to kind of bring under the tent to help you make those decisions?
That's a great question. Number one, they need to really align with their values. I think integrity matters so much. Integrity is one. Initiative. Do they take initiative? Like, are they a trash picker-upper? Do they take the initiative to take on projects? Do they reach out and say, hey, I'd love to help with this curriculum, or hey, I'd love to help with this next marketing campaign? I love when they come to me and they show that initiative. And they show me that, hey, I'm ready for more. And they're telling me they're ready to get on that leadership bench. There's also a chapter in the book about building your leadership bench. But another thing too is intelligence, not just IQ, but EQ, the emotional intelligence. Are they able to have hard conversations? Are they brave enough to initiate the tough things? And, are they open to feedback? Because if they're teachable, feedback is how they're going to grow, but you can't coach attitude. And I see a lot of leaders making big mistakes when they move their high performers in one position and they're like, oh, this person is a high performer in this position, so surely if I move them into leadership, they're going to shine as leaders. Well, not everybody wants to be a leader. Not everybody wants to be there. I also see a lot of people making mistakes, and I do too, to think, oh, I've got a gap in my leadership team. I need to promote someone up. They're not great in this position, but I'll bring them into leadership. I'll nurture them. I'll pour into them. I'll do all the things. I'll make them feel great. I'll give them all this training. I'll inspire them. And they're still on the B team.
Yeah.
And, one of my favorite leadership books, it's by Marcus Buckingham, and it's years old, but it's called First Break All the Rules. And in that book, that's where I really learned the A team, B team, C team, which if you've ever heard me teach before, I teach a lot on People Probe, on analyzing your team. And he says this quote that I've not forgotten 15 years later, that average people will never be excellent. Above average can. So when we focus on that B team, those above average people, those are the people that you can move into your A team. But they have to be willing to be coachable, and they have to want that.
Yeah. Well, I think coachability is another really important trait. It's a really important skill, especially in your kind of A team. And there's, you talk about accountability in the book, because ultimately I don't think you can foster a great culture without that accountability. And the quote is, you can't preach values without accountability, or they become empty rhetoric. Why do you believe that accountability is so misunderstood right now?
Let's say, for example, when there's a press release, there's a press conference, something has happened. The sheriff comes out and says, we'll find out who did this and we'll hold them accountable. Well, what does even hold you accountable mean? Are you putting them in shackles? I want to inspire accountability. I want people on my team who understand the assignment and who get it. And when we get off track, it's not a character flaw that they got off track. It's just we need to realign expectations, or maybe, goes back to me, maybe I wasn't clear in fully fleshing out the vision for this project, or explaining fully, what does success look like?
Yeah.
But do people understand what results they are responsible for? And I think a lot of leaders really miss the mark on that. When I talk to leaders, the number one thing that they say is that their team is not accountable. And I say, whose fault is that? Is that their fault, or is that your fault? Were you clear on that? I say that not from a space of, it must be you, there's something wrong with you, but coming from a space of, I have been the one to think maybe it was the team, until I took a look at what was going on and how I did or didn't communicate those expectations well, or wasn't clear enough. And I'm telling you, because of the amount of messaging that we're getting now, think of how many social medias get checked before people get out of the bed.
Yeah.
They go to Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and maybe LinkedIn, and then their messages or their WhatsApp or their email. There's so many messages coming in, and then we're digitally connected all day long, and our brains can just not handle all of the information. And so there was another study that said, in 2024, people are 15% less aware of their expectations at work. Nothing's changed. They're just not as aware. So you have to be consistent. And I find some people rolling their eyes and oh my gosh, why can't anybody do anything that they're supposed to do? That's a good question. And you need to ask. If you're struggling because your team is not executing what you think they should be doing, you need to sit down and have an honest conversation. What was your understanding of the expectation? What is your understanding of the results you're responsible for?
And I do think that's something that maybe people kind of miss the boat on, is that accountability is helping your team be successful. And ultimately, it's very unlikely that a team member will only work for you and your organization for the rest of their life. And so as a leader, in a perfect world, leaders are helping their team members move on to their next opportunity. Right. They're taking something away from them and their leadership style that they can carry with them throughout the rest of their career. So if you're not holding your team accountable, it ultimately is the disservice to that team member.
It is. And, and I used to believe back in the days that people would stay with you for a long time. My first few employees that I hired stayed with me 5, 6, 7 years, and 2 of them are still my best and closest friends now. I've had some great employees along the way. The longest one I've had, her name is Debbie, and she's been with me nearly 22 years. Kelly, I could go on and list the ones that have been with me for years and years and years who are amazing. But they're also Gen X and Boomers. We are loyal people, and we like that consistency. But the younger generations like that flexibility. I've got a Gen Z leader right now that I adore, and in helping her walk through some of the challenges she's faced, I realize I am probably, just like I do with my own children, teaching and training them to leave, right? And that's the thing that we do as parents. My job as their parent was to teach and train them to leave. And now I'm an empty nester. And I'm a grandmother now. I taught them and trained them to leave and go into the world. And really, that's almost how we have to look at our team. And then we just have to trust that, yes, we poured into them and we've invested into them. But we didn't do that because we thought they were going to be, held in our grip until they retired at 65. But, this girl that I have now, probably her next employer, I want her to do well regardless of what her future looks like. I want her to do well as a human because I see potential in her. And if she can do some hard things and get over some of her fears and some of her, just insecurities, what a great leader she can truly be. And I want that for her.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. And I mean, clearly you lead from a place of, as you mentioned, kind of love and empathy for your team. And I think a lot of leaders want to lead that way as well. But unfortunately, I think that maybe they get kind of caught up in the avoidance of conflict or, kind of being a little bit of a people pleaser. And so I'm curious, how do you balance compassion and accountability to avoid being too harsh?
Well, let me make a confession. That's funny that you said empathy, because this is a confession. I'm just a vulnerable moment here. Empathy is not my go-to. I am an Enneagram 3. I'm a doer. I need things to get done. And so a lot of times as a doer, I can skip right over all the feelings and just get things done. As a Gen X also, we can come to work without a lot of feelings. The way that we feel have nothing to do with the way that we work. And so, but this is what I've learned the hard way, is that my people need me to connect with them. Because let's say, for example, someone calls in sick. Immediately, my brain goes to, oh my gosh, she's going to cover your shift. Like, how are we going to get this taken care of today? Like, I want to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you're not well. But I'm like, okay, I hope you feel better. Bye. I've got to move on. But also, we have, the mental health conversation, as it should, has become more to the forefront than ever has before. The pandemic repositioned the mental health conversation in a big, big way. And just realizing and truly loving people and caring for people, it's like, how do we hold space for these true challenges that they're having, but yet uphold our standards at the same time? And so even if empathy is not like your natural go-to, it doesn't mean that you can't stop and slow down and connect, because I do care about people, but I know that the way that my personality is, sometimes it can appear that I'm just going to skip over that and I just care about the work. You can care about the people and you can care about the work, and there's we've got feelers and we've got doers. Doers are like, why do we have so many feelings? And feelers are like, where's all the empathy? And so I think just the self-awareness around that, if you're a leader, that you just know that you're a doer and you just go directly into the doing, that your people sometimes need you to pause and be present with them.
Yeah. And that takes me into my next question. What happens when you see teams finally experiencing alignment instead of those mixed messages?
It just feels lighter. And it will feel like you'll get your joy back. Like when you have the right people in the right seats. Sometimes getting that alignment means pruning. And pruning means that you may not have the right people in the right seats. And having the courage to realize that, hey, if this is where I'm going, I may not have the right people. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means that they may not be the right people for the next step. But when you have the right people in the right seats, you just don't feel that friction. You just don't feel that resistance. You're going to see higher retention. You're probably going to see better customer satisfaction. And you're going to just feel it. I used to dread our leadership meetings so much because I had a leader that would bring in tension all the time. It was like as soon as we would show up, whether it was live and in person, it was automatically the stage for the complaints.
Yeah.
And it started every single meeting negative. And so I was like, she needs to be heard. I need to allow for the space for her to be heard. Then I'm like, no. We are going to have an agenda.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about wins. We're going to talk about what's working. We're going to have something for issues that we're going to set aside. We're going to talk about those issues, but those issues are not going to take precedence because unless there's red, blood, or fire, which we've never had either one, by the way, unless there's red, those things are not going to take a front row seat. And so when you're just clear about the kind of culture that you want to create and you have people who are willing to come alongside and live into that, it changes everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that structure is something that unfortunately a lot of people miss or maybe don't feel like they have the time to start implementing into meetings, whether they be one-on-ones, group settings. What is a breakdown of how you structured those?
A lot of it goes back to EOS, right? The L10 meetings, the level 10 meetings, where you keep the meetings to a certain amount of time. You go over your issues, your decisions, and what you need to solve. So the framework, it's not exactly EOS, but it's very similar to how we structure that. And honestly, I hate meetings, if I'm going to be honest, because to me, sometimes they're inefficient. But what I learned is if you have good meetings, your meetings matter. Where I think a lot of people miss the mark is that they think, oh, we've got to have a weekly meeting. We have to have a daily meeting. And, and they just have meetings for the sake of having meetings. But I just believe that if the meetings should not be for me to get information from my team. If I need information from a certain team member, then I need to just reach out to that team member and get the information. I don't need to bring the whole crew in to have a one-on-one discussion with an audience. Or if I need to address something specifically, I don't need to be like, this is what so many leaders do. And I used to do it too. No longer do I do it. I don't bring everyone in and talk about an issue, hoping that the person having the issue just magically goes, it's me, she's talking about me. No. If there's an issue or we're missing the mark, then that needs to be a direct discussion. Yeah. And I no longer lead meetings out of just, hey, we need to have a meeting. Those meetings have purpose. And guess what? If we get to the end of a week, like we were supposed to have a leadership meeting last Friday. And as we're leading into the week, I'm like, you know what? I've had one-on-ones with all my people. I don't think we need to have a meeting. So guess what, guys? We're done. If you need anything directly, reach out. But just because we had a meeting scheduled doesn't necessarily always mean that meeting needs to happen. We just tabled it until after the holidays.
Yeah. I think giving time back, too, is always something that people can look forward to.
Seriously, nobody's mad about a Friday afternoon meeting being canceled. Nobody's upset about it.
No. Well, this brings me to another quote in the book that's very vulnerable that talks about really your why you kept getting back up, why you feel the need to push forward through difficult times. And that quote, if you want to say it, you can.
The only backup plan is to get back up?
Yep, the only backup plan is to get back up. I did not want my children to see me fail.
Yes. So that came about, as I mentioned, COVID completely shut down all of our businesses. Every conference I was going to speak at, our entire enrichment business. I even teach yoga on the side, and all the yoga classes got shut down. Everything that I did was completely shut down. And my husband is my business partner. So we went to nada, and like the visions of my next meal being at the soup kitchen did not seem like that far off. And so it was a lot to rebuild. Yeah. And we began to rebuild it. But see, it was harder than it was the first time. It was harder than it had ever been before. And I was with my friend Rachel in Montana. I'd gone to visit her to do a team building for her team. And I just felt really depleted. And we sat down on her couch and she said, why are you still doing this? And I said, I don't know. And she said, no, I'm going to do this exercise with you. And it's Dean Graziosi, The 7 Layers of Why. And so it's like, why are you doing this? And then I give an answer. But why are you doing that? And then I give another answer. So she gets to the 7th why. And at this point, I'm bawling. She's bawling. And she goes, why? And I said, because I don't want my children to see me fail. And, I started this business when my daughter was a baby. Like I was a school teacher before, and I didn't want to go back to work full time. And so we bought our first Stretch and Grow franchise because I wanted to be that mom who didn't miss anything. Yeah. And I knew if I had a full-time job where I was teaching someone else's children, I was not going to be able to be with my own. And so everything I have done has been for my family. And it's been for my kids. And in my generation, the women that came before me, in many cases, they could be teachers or secretaries or nurses or moms. That was the choice of my mother's generation. Yeah. And so I'm from a family of a lot of women. And I saw a lot of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. I saw things happen to where a man, what if something happened to the said man who promised to take care of you forever, and now you're taking care of yourself, and now you're putting yourself in a vulnerable situation, or worse yet, a victim. Mm-hmm. I knew that I needed to be strong for my kids. I wanted them to see, like, when life waylays you, you get back up. And, I did a mastermind with a lady named Stacey Wallace, and she's faith-based, and she said on one of these days when I was just in one of those like deer in the headlights, I'm showing up to this meeting and I'm just listening. And she said something, warriors don't retreat, they reload. And I kind of used that as a mantra. Yeah. And I thought, okay, here I am. I'm not going to quit. I'm for sure not a quitter. And just because things are hard, I'm not going to show my kids that when things get hard, you just quit, you throw in the towel. Yeah. Until your season is up, do not quit. Mm-hmm.
What would you say to leaders who maybe feel like quitting right now or going through a tough time and don't know if they can take that next step?
Yeah. So one day the season's going to end. It's going to end in one of three ways, right? You're either going to quit, you're going to get fired, or you're going to die, or you're going to sell your business. You're not always going to be in this situation. Yeah. And until you know for sure that your season is up, do whatever it is that you do to get discernment. As a person of faith, I pray. I've always prayed from the beginning, like, I want God's will for my life. I was an extremely rebellious teenager, took my parents on a wild ride, made a lot of really, really, really bad decisions. And so I have this like deep fear that I'm going to completely screw up my life. I'm going to do really unwise things, and I'm going to put myself in a vulnerable position, and it's going to be all my fault. Like if I look at what are some core fears, I have that underlying fear of making the wrong decisions. And so because I don't necessarily always trust myself, I do what I do to get discernment. I pray, I listen to people who know me, love me, who have aligned faith, who have aligned values. And until you know that your season is up, do not quit, because you'll never know the joy of finishing if you quit before your season is up.
Yeah. You really become a better person, a better friend, a better leader through vulnerability. And you talk about discernment and identifying your core fears and your reason for being and for doing. How do you recommend that people identify their core fears? And then how do they work into the true why and their motivation for continuing to push through difficult times?
Yeah. That is a great question. I think it goes back to, what is that story that scared you? And in the book, I share a few different stories that scared me. But there is something that we keep deep in our souls, something I think that we're afraid of, that if we move in this direction, we're going to lose this, or that's going to happen, or we're going to hurt someone, or we're going to be alone, or whatever those fears are. We all have different ones. Just identify, look deep within yourself. Maybe it's journaling, maybe it's a retreat, maybe it's through prayer. Everybody, I think, has a different way to discover those things. But for me, it's always taken a deep path into self-discovery. And instead of pointing fingers and blaming other people for what's happening, I've just learned to look at, what is my role? How did I shape it? And how can I shift it? And in the book, that's a key question that starts off. When you look at what's happening in your culture, you have to say, how did I shape this? If you look at your team and you look at the disconnect and you look at the problems, we as leaders shaped it in some way. Yeah. But we as leaders also have the power to shift it. And that is where your superpower comes in. The book takes you through the journey of where we nearly lost our business because of my inability to confront some really hard and challenging things. Everything is a lesson. In life, you're either teaching a lesson, learning a lesson, or you're part of someone else's lesson. The latter is my least favorite, I would like to say. Yeah. But there are lessons along the way. I hope you feel lighter. It's not all your fault. It's just self-awareness. For the leader who thinks, I've done this a long time, there's nothing else I can learn, I promise you, I've done it a long time too, and the learning that I've had in the last 5 years have been 100x what I learned in the quarter century before that.
Yeah.
For the leader who is just getting started, learn from my mistakes. And for the one that's in the trenches and just feels the weight that they have to carry for their whole team every single day, there's hope. There's hope. Leadership doesn't have to be that hard, but there are just some tweaks that you can make to move ahead and make life and work a little more easier, but also a little more fun.
Now, after writing the book, being this close to release of the book, what does the term transform your team really mean to you now?
What is interesting is that Transform Your Team was not the name of the book when I started it. Transform Your Team is the third name of the book. The first name of the book was called Discomfort Zone. How do you get out of the discomfort zone? And I called it the discomfort zone because I thought this is going to be a book about accountability. We don't want to have hard conversations because we don't want to be uncomfortable and we don't want to make people uncomfortable. So I wrote the whole book with the premise of this is what it looks like. But then I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so much more than not wanting to be stuck in our comfort zone. We've normalized staying comfortable. I mean, this whole term bed rotting, have you heard this?
Yes.
What in the actual heck? I mean, I can't even stand to lay in the bed. Like the minute my eyes open, I'm out of the bed. I don't have a lazy bone in my body. I want to go, I want to move, I want to do, I want to be. There's no framework around me, but that's comfortable, right? Our society wants to be comfortable, but growth does not happen in the comfort zone.
Right.
Growth happens when you're willing to sit in the seat of discomfort, even if it brings someone else out of their comfort zone into discomfort, knowing that they would rather be waterboarded than to have to be uncomfortable, and that I would rather be tortured than to put someone in that seat, or worse yet, to put myself in that seat. So that was the first name. Then I was like, okay, that's not it. Then it's going to be Culture Cure. And it was about how do you cure your culture? Our cultures, there's a cancer in our cultures. How do we cure it? But I really began to listen and study and, of course, pray. And I'm like, what do people want? If I had the sentence, I want blank, if I'm going to read a book, because I'm a consumer of content. I read books all the time. I listen to podcasts all the time. I go to conferences all the time. I love to learn from other people. So a lot of my learning didn't just come from my epiphany. It came from sitting in the seat of vulnerability and learning from other people and listening to other people. And if I thought, what do I want? Do I really want a culture cure? Or do I want to transform my team? Because the culture is what people feel like. The culture is the meeting that happens after the meeting, right? Like you have the meeting and then is everybody like getting on their text, having their sidebar conversations about how horrible work is. Like that's not what you want. So what I wanted was a transformed team. And no team is ever going to be perfect, right? Because it's made up of messy humans just like you and me. But transform your team is the hope for something new. It's the hope that if a leader can read this and if they can find 2 or 3 things that they can tweak to take them to the next level, it's worth it. Even if it's just so they feel like, okay, me too. I'm not alone. Oh, I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I want them to feel hope and I want them to feel happy about their work again. I'm so blessed, Sierra, because I love what I do. I love my team. I love what I do. I do not love the challenges. I mean, there are a lot of things that have happened that there is no part of me on this planet that would agree to going through that kind of wreck, but it happened. And one of the things that we haven't talked about is that when I was going through these really hard challenges with my team, but I was also going through a really hard personal challenge. My cousin Betsy, who is my person in life, was diagnosed with ALS during the middle of this huge uproar on my leadership team. So at one point, I am struggling with the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. And ALS is a terminal disease, right? And it's like you wake up every day and concrete has been poured on another limb of your body until you cannot eat, breathe, finally speak. Watching her walk through that, watching her life literally slip away like sand while I'm navigating this, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And I think that's why when I first wrote the book, I had to go back and rewrite parts because I realized I wasn't healed. Grief can either break you or it can break you open. And I don't think I would have learned the lessons that I needed to learn had I not been completely broken and needed to go back and rebuild. And if you're not a leader and you're being led by someone else, that person that you're being led by is a human too. That person you're being led by has challenges, maybe in their marriage, maybe they're dealing with a sick parent or a sick relative. Everyone has challenges, and sometimes it makes me really sad to see people complaining about their work and complaining about their leader when their leader's a human too. I think just seeing people as the humans that they are and learning to work together, because that understanding and that empathy, it works both ways.
Yeah.
And when you're in desperate need of grace and you get it, you'll never forget it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Beth, your vulnerability and honesty is really inspiring, and I know that it's all poured into the book, into Transform Your Team, and cannot recommend that book enough. I think it's really great for young leaders, aspiring leaders, as well as seasoned leaders, leaders going through hard times, leaders going through the best times of their career. I really think it's one that has something for everybody. Can you tell us a little bit more about where people can grab their copy?
Yes, the name of the website is transformyourteambook.com. Now, I do have a big goal. We want to be Amazon bestsellers. That's just one little thing I'd love to be able to check off the bucket list. And I cannot believe it finally got done. I cannot believe it's going out into the world. It is definitely a labor of love and something that was so hard to write, but something that I so helps people.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely an item to cross off the bucket list for
yes.
sure.